Hello everyone. Welcome to the Everyday Mind. Today, the air carries something cold and mineral. The kind of cold that does not bite, but settles, pressing gently against the skin, like a palm laid flat against stone. Somewhere above the tree line, the wind moves through nothing but open space, and you can hear it the way you hear the sea from a room you haven't left yet. Present, wide, unhurried. The ground up here holds a particular smell, wet rock and old moss, and underneath that, something older still, like the earth has been exhaling the same breath for several hundred years and has no plans to stop. If you were hoping for a shorter walk to get here, I completely understand. The Alps have a way of making every distance feel like a personal opinion. Now, relax and enjoy, and let us begin our journey together. Chapter 1. The Edge of the High Plateau. You are standing at the edge of something that does not have a clear beginning. The path behind you, the narrow trail of packed earth and loose shale that brought you up through the last belt of pine, has gone quiet now, not disappeared, not forgotten, simply irrelevant. The trees stopped some distance back, and with them went the particular sound trees make, that low collective exhaling of branch and needle, the hush of things growing. Up here, there are no trees. There is only the plateau, and the sky sitting very close above it, and the grass, stiff, pale at the tips, bending in long, slow arcs whenever the wind decides to move through. You take a breath. The air is different here. You noticed it within the first few steps out of the tree line, the way you notice a change in the quality of light when clouds shift. Not dramatic, just true. Down in the valley, the air had weight in a comfortable way, warmth from pine resin, the faint dampness of a stream somewhere off the trail, the ordinary smell of a day being lived in. Up here, the air is thinner and colder, and it carries almost nothing in it except itself. It fills the lungs cleanly. It asks nothing of you. You stand still for a moment. Ahead of you, the plateau stretches out in shades of green and grey and a particular silver-brown that has no good name in any language you know. The colour of old moss when it is wet, and the light is low and even. The ground is not flat. It rolls in long, unhurried undulations, like the surface of something that once moved and then thought better of it and decided to remain. Small hollows hold shadow. The higher ridges catch what light comes through the cloud cover, which is thick today, uniform, a ceiling of white-grey that diffuses everything equally so that there are no harsh shadows anywhere, no strong contrasts, only gradations. Only the world softening into itself in every direction. Your eyes move across the space. There are rocks, not the scattered pebbles of a mountain path, not the clean faces of cut stone. These are boulders, some the size of a wardrobe, some the size of a house, some larger than that. So large that from here you cannot quite hold their full shape in a single glance. They are distributed across the plateau with a spacing that feels neither random nor deliberate, like the placement of objects in a room where someone very old and very unhurried has had a long time to arrange things to their liking. They are covered in moss. Even from this distance, you can see the texture, that dense, velvet-heavy surface that turns stone from a hard thing into a soft one, that makes the light behave differently, absorbing it rather than reflecting it back. The moss is darkest near the ground, where moisture collects and lingers. Higher up the face of each boulder, it lightens, more grey, more dry, more dusty, as though the stone has been slowly breathing upward, exhaling moisture into the air around it over long years. The wind moves again. It comes from no particular direction. It simply arrives, passes through you, continues. It carries the smell of the plateau, that cold, clean mineral smell, layered over something organic and soft, like the inside of a very old wooden chest that has held nothing for a long time, but still remembers what it once contained. You pull the collar of your jacket a little higher, not because you are cold in any unpleasant way, but because the wind is the kind that gets into the gap between fabric and skin and settles there. Your feet find their footing. The ground is different here than on the trail. The thin topsoil gives a little underfoot, not enough to unbalance you, just enough that each step has a slight compression to it, a small give, as though the plateau is acknowledging your weight and deciding, yes, all right, you may pass. The moss on the rocks, you suspect, would feel like this too, more yielding than it looks. Something between carpet and moss-covered stone that has never been anyone's floor but yours, right now. You begin to walk, not toward anything in particular. The plateau does not suggest destinations. It simply extends, and you move through it the way you move through the early moments of sleep, not directed, not purposeful, just present. Each step carrying you a little further from the edge of things you recognize. The nearest boulder is some minutes ahead. It sits lower than the others, partially settled into the hillside, as though it has been there long enough to begin the long process of becoming part of it. You are in no hurry. The cloud cover is even. The wind is low and consistent. The moss and stone and open sky hold the plateau in a quiet that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a particular kind of stillness, the kind that has texture to it, depth, the kind that makes the small sounds that do exist, your footsteps, the wind, once, very distantly, a bird you cannot see, feel more precise, more themselves. You walk. The plateau receives you without comment. Chapter 2. Shapes that remember something. The first boulder you pass is unremarkable, in the way that truly large things are often unremarkable up close. You have to stop thinking about it as a boulder at all. It is simply presence, a wall of grey-green stone rising to your left, taller than you expected, taller than it looked from the edge of the plateau. The moss on its lower half is so thick it has lost all definition. It is not stone with moss on it. It is something that has become, over a very long time, a third thing entirely. You do not stop. You let it pass behind you. The plateau continues. The spacing between boulders is wider than it seemed from the tree line. Each one sits in its own territory of open ground, surrounded by the pale, stiff grass and the low creeping plants that manage a living up here. Small, tight rosettes of something dark green, like in the color of old silver. Patches of bare earth where the wind has won its argument with the soil over many seasons. The sky above remains its uniform white-gray. No sun, but no real darkness either. Everything is lit from everywhere at once, gently, without preference. You notice the second boulder before you reach it. It is larger than the first. It sits at a slight angle, leaning, if you could call it leaning, very slightly to the left. The way something leans when it has settled into weight it has been carrying for a long time. What catches your attention is not the size, it is the shape. You slow your pace. The left side of the boulder rises in a long curved line that is almost too smooth for rock, not polished, nothing so deliberate as that, but eroded gradually over an enormous span of time into a curve that the eye wants to follow. It sweeps upward and then bends, and where it bends, there is a suggestion of something folded, something gathered. You stop. You stand a few meters away and you look at it for a moment without naming what you are seeing. Then slowly, you name it. A wing. Or what a wing might look like if it had been made of stone and then left to rest for so long that the stone forgot it was ever anything else. You take a breath. The air is the same. Cold, mineral, clean. Nothing has changed except the way you are looking. You walk on. The third boulder is different again. Lower, broader, stretched along the ground in a horizontal mass that the moss covers entirely, top and sides both, so that from a distance it could almost be a low hill, a natural rise in the terrain. But it is stone underneath. You can see where the moss has thinned at one corner and the grey rock shows through. And the texture there is different from the surrounding stone formations you passed on the trail. Smoother, finer grained. You crouch down at that corner and look at the surface. There are lines in the rock. Parallel, roughly. Slight. They could be stress fractures, the natural consequence of water finding its way into a crack, freezing, expanding, repeating that process across hundreds of winters until the stone records it. They could be that. You run one finger along the nearest line, and it is narrow and clean, and it follows the curve of the boulder's edge in a way that makes you pause for just a moment. They could be scales. You stand up. You do not decide what they are. You leave it as a question the plateau is holding for you, unhurried, the way this place holds everything, without urgency, without demand. The wind moves through again, low, sustained. It comes from the direction of the larger boulders, deeper in the plateau, and it carries something in it, not a smell exactly, more a quality of air that has passed over a great deal of stone and moss before reaching you. Dense, slightly damp, familiar in a way you cannot account for. You walk further in. The boulders are larger here. Not dramatically. There is no moment where the scale shifts suddenly and announces itself. It is gradual, the way the deepening of an afternoon is gradual, so that you only notice it when you look back toward where you came from and register that the plateau's edge is now some distance behind you, the tree line barely visible, the path you walked entirely gone into the undulating terrain. You are in the middle of something now. The boulders around you, there are 6 or 7 visible from where you stand. Each one is its own world. Each one has its own particular mass and moss texture and the way its shape sits in the air. None of them are alike. But there is something they share that is harder to name than size or color. A quality of stillness that is not passive. The stillness of something that is resting with intent. You find yourself walking more quietly. Not because you are afraid. There is no fear here. The plateau does not produce that sensation. The quiet you have fallen into is more like the quiet you find yourself using in a room where someone is sleeping. a courtesy, a small unconscious acknowledgement that the space you are moving through belongs, in some older sense, to something else, and you are passing through it as a guest who knows how to behave. Your footsteps on the moss make almost no sound. This you notice now, genuinely notice, with a small surprise. On the trail, your boots found pebbles and loose earth and produced a clear, crisp rhythm. Here, the moss absorbs each step entirely. You could be walking on something made to receive you. The effect is a kind of auditory softening. The world around you continues its low wind sound, its distant atmospheric breath, but you yourself have become nearly silent within it. A person-shaped silence moving through a larger one. The mist arrives without announcement. You become aware of it the way you become aware of the temperature dropping, not at a specific moment, but as an accumulated fact. The air between the nearest boulders has a slight opacity to it now, not thick, not obscuring, just a thin whiteness at ground level that catches what little ambient light filters through the cloud cover and holds it, diffuses it, turns it into something that seems to come from everywhere at once. The mist moves, slowly, with a patience that is almost architectural. It collects around the base of the largest boulder ahead. You watch it. The mist flows into the hollows, where stone meets earth, and it pools there, slow and deliberate. Trace in the base of the boulder's shape, and the shape it traces is, you stay with this thought, not the irregular, unpredictable outline of a rock formation. It is a shape with a logic. The mist finds a low contour along the ground that stretches out to one side, widens, narrows, turns, and from where you are standing, the shape it outlines along the plateau floor is long and curved and tapered at both ends. You stand very still. The wind moves through the space between you and the boulder. It makes a sound as it passes over the uneven stone surface, a low, unhurried tone, not musical exactly, but tonal, sustained. The kind of sound that, if you heard it indoors, you would go looking for its source. Out here, it simply is. It lasts for a few seconds, and then the wind shifts, and the sound changes, and then it is gone. The mist continues its slow work. You breathe. The cold air fills your chest, and you hold it for a moment, just a moment, before releasing it slowly, watching your breath become its own small cloud and dissolve into the larger one settling across the ground. You are very aware of your own warmth right now, the warmth of a body that has been walking, that carries its own temperature through the cold, that exists in this landscape as a small moving center of heat. The boulders around you hold a different kind of coolness, not unpleasant, just different. The coolness of things that have been here since before warmth was a concept that mattered. You take another step forward. The grass bends under your foot and springs back. The plateau receives you, still without comment, deeper now, further in, and the shapes around you continue their long, unhurried resting, their faces of moss-covered stone tilted at angles that make no sense for ordinary rock, but make a quiet, patient sense for something that lay down here a very long time ago and has not yet decided whether it is finished sleeping. Chapter 3. What the Shepherds Knew. There is a particular kind of knowledge that does not come from reading. You have arrived at the center of the plateau, or what feels like the center, though the land here offers no landmarks by which to confirm it. The boulders are largest here, tallest. The moss on their upper faces has thinned where the wind is stronger, and in those thinned places, the stone shows through in shades of grey, so pale they are almost white, veined faintly with something darker, as though the rock has its own quiet circulatory system that keeps its own time. You stand among them, and you feel, without quite deciding to feel it, that this space has been known before, not explored, not studied, known, in the older sense of the word, the sense that belongs to people who lived close enough to a place that it entered their bodies, the way cold enters the fingers, gradually and completely. The shepherds who worked these upper pastures, and there were shepherds here for several centuries at minimum, moving their animals up in late spring when the lower meadows turned dry, and moving them down again before the first hard frost. Those shepherds knew this plateau, the way you know the layout of a room you have slept in for years, without thinking, with the body rather than the mind. They knew where the ground turned soft after rain, where the wind came from before the weather changed, where the animals would not go regardless of how much grass grew there. They did not go near the large stones, not because of superstition exactly. That word is too simple and too dismissive for what it actually was. It was more like the instinct you develop around something very old and very large, a kind of spatial courtesy, a reading of scale and presence that tells you without argument that some things are not yours to walk across or sit upon or use as a windbreak, even if they would serve perfectly well for all of those purposes. The animals knew it first. You can almost picture it, a late afternoon in some September 200 years ago, the light already turning amber and low across the plateau. A flock of sheep moving in that loose collective way flocks move, responding to some shared sense of direction, and then, at a certain point, without any visible cue, the flock bends, curves away from the largest boulders, finds a path around them that adds distance and effort and makes no practical sense, and the shepherd watches this happen for the 10th year in a row and stops trying to correct it. He has a word for the stones. In the dialect of this particular valley, a dialect that has mostly dissolved now into the standard language, leaving only traces in the names of certain peaks and pastures, there was a word that does not translate cleanly. The closest rendering in any language you know would be something like, one who rests before the next flight, not sleeping exactly, resting with intent. The distinction mattered to the people who made the word. You walk slowly between two of the largest boulders. The ground here is different, softer, darker. More moisture collects in the shelter of the stones than on the open plateau, and the moss here is denser, greener, a darker and more saturated green than the paler growth on the exposed ground. It cushions your steps completely. You could walk here in bare feet and feel nothing but softness. The smell changes too. In the open plateau, the air is mineral and wide. Here, between the stones, it thickens slightly, takes on a depth that is hard to name, but immediately recognizable. Old growth, damp stone. The smell of things living very slowly in conditions that require patience. It is not unpleasant. It is, in fact, deeply settling. The olfactory equivalent of a low sustained note on a cello, the kind that you feel in the chest before you consciously hear it. You pause between the two boulders. To your left, the stone face is almost vertical, and the moss here is a full handspan, thick, dark as a forest floor. To your right, the second boulder leans, very slightly, almost imperceptibly, and its moss has grown in a way that follows the lean, thicker on the lower side, tapering as the surface rises and angles away. Between you and both surfaces, there is perhaps 3 meters of clear space, enough to breathe, enough to feel held without feeling enclosed. The wind does not reach here. This is the first time since you arrived on the plateau that the wind has stopped entirely, and the absence of it is almost startling. Not unpleasant, but noticeable. The way you notice a sound that has been playing in the background of a room only when it finally stops. The air between the boulders is still, and in that stillness, the small sounds that the wind had been covering reveal themselves. The faint creak of something, a stone settling perhaps, or the moss shifting its weight, and once, briefly, the sound of water moving somewhere beneath the ground, a low and distant murmur that stops before you can fully locate it. You stay very still and listen. Nothing. Then again, that low murmur. Underground water finding its way between the roots of things, down through the stone, following a logic that has nothing to do with maps or paths, or any human understanding of direction. Just water and gravity and time, moving in the dark between the sleeping stones. The shepherd who made that word, the one that means resting before the next flight, he would have stood somewhere close to here. Maybe not between these exact stones, but in a space that felt like this one. He would have stood in the still air and listened to the same underground water, and he would have looked at the curved shapes of stone and moss rising on either side of him, and he would have felt what you are feeling now. Not small, or not only small. There is another feeling underneath the smallness, a feeling of being included in something, not as an important element, not as a participant, just as a presence that happens to be here at this moment and is accepted by the space the way the air is accepted, the way the moss accepts the rain. Without ceremony, without judgment, you are here and you are warm and you are quiet enough, and that is sufficient. A single grass stem, tall enough to have bent under its own weight, touches the moss-covered face of the boulder to your right. It rests there, the tip of it against the green surface, very lightly, held by nothing except its own gentle exhaustion and the still air. You watch it for a moment. There is something in this small contact, stem to moss, grass to stone, that is entirely unremarkable, and somehow, in this light and this stillness, quietly wonderful. Two things that have no language and no intention, resting against each other with a completeness that requires nothing more than exactly what it is. You breathe out. The cold air moves through your chest and out again and becomes part of the still air of this sheltered space, rises slightly. You watch it, just barely visible, and then disperses. The shepherds are long gone from these pastures. The animals are gone. The dialect is mostly gone. But the stones remain, and the moss remains, and the underground water still follows its ancient and indifferent route below your feet. Some things are simply too patient to be ended by the passing of the people who notice them. You take another slow step deeper between the stones. The ground yields softly. The air is still and cool, and carries its deep organic smell. Above you, through the narrow strip of sky visible between the two boulder faces, the cloud cover holds its uniform white-grey, neither darkening nor brightening, committed to its long patience. A sky that is not dramatic, has no interest in being dramatic, simply continues. Chapter 4. The Moss as Memory. You find the largest boulder by accident. You have been moving through the sheltered corridor between the two stones, stepping slowly, following no particular direction except the one your feet suggest, and then the corridor opens, and you are standing in a wider space, and the boulder is simply there, ahead and to your right, close enough that you have to tilt your head back slightly to see where it ends against the sky. It is very large. You stand with this fact for a moment before approaching. There is a quality to very large things that requires a brief adjustment, not of the eyes, which register size immediately, but of something else. The sense of scale that lives somewhere deeper than vision, the part of you that measures the world in relation to your own body, and sometimes needs a moment to recalibrate. The boulder is perhaps 4 times your height. It is not perfectly round. Nothing up here is round. The wind and the freeze and thaw of many winters have seen to that, but it has a general roundedness to it, a softness of outline that the moss amplifies. The top is domed slightly. The sides curve outward, and then inward again toward the base, where the stone has settled into the earth over what must be an immense span of time, the ground rising slightly to meet it, the moss on the lowest sections so thick it is difficult to tell exactly where stone ends and soil begins. You walk toward it. The ground between you and the boulder is clear, short-cropped grass, very fine, the kind that only grows where larger plants have long since given up competing, and between the grass blades, the dark earth shows through in patches. Your footsteps are quiet here too. Everything up on this plateau seems designed, though designed is too deliberate a word, seems inclined toward quiet. You stop when you are close enough to touch it. For a moment you do not. You simply look. The moss on this boulder is the finest you have seen today. It covers the entire visible surface without interruption, without a single patch of bare stone, as though it has had long enough to be thorough. The color shifts as your eyes move across it, darkest at the base, where a deep bottle green holds the moisture of many accumulated seasons, and then lightening as the surface rises, the moss becoming more grey-green, more silvery, drier, until near the top it is almost the same color as the sky above it, and seems to dissolve into the air at the edges. You raise your hand. You press your palm flat against the surface. The cold of the stone reaches you immediately. It travels through the moss and through the small gap of air that your palm traps against the surface, and it settles against your skin, certain and clean. But the moss itself is warmer than you expected. Not warm the way a living thing is warm, but warmer than the air. It has been holding the diffuse heat of the clouded day, the way a heavy wool blanket holds warmth, slowly, without drama, simply retaining what passes through it. You keep your hand there. The moss is dense under your palm. It compresses very slightly, perhaps a millimeter, perhaps less, and then holds. It does not spring back immediately the way moss sometimes does. It stays compressed for a moment, as though acknowledging the contact, and then very slowly, over several seconds, returns to its original form. Patient, unhurried. Your fingers move slightly, without intention. They find a texture beneath the moss surface, not the smooth stone you expected, but something with variation, subtle. You press a little harder, and the moss compresses further, and under it the stone surface becomes more legible to your fingertips. There are irregularities, lines, not sharp. Nothing sharp exists on a surface that has been covered and cushioned and slowly metabolized by living growth for this long, but present. You crouch down to look more closely. At this height, at this angle, the light, diffuse as it is, reveals more. The surface of the stone beneath the moss, visible only at the very base, where the growth has worn thinnest from seasons of frost heave and meltwater, shows a pattern. Long, low ridges running roughly parallel. They follow the curve of the boulder's surface rather than crossing it, each one perhaps the width of your thumb, spaced evenly enough to suggest repetition, but unevenly enough to suggest something other than geology. You look at them for a long time. The word that comes is the word you have been not quite using since the plateau opened before you. But here, crouched at the base of this particular stone, with the moss warm under one hand and the faint parallel ridges under the other, the word arrives without apology. Scales. Or what scales might look like if the thing they once belonged to had been lying here for so long that the stone had taken on their impression the way stone takes on the impression of shells and leaves and bones, slowly, under pressure, across time measured not in years, but in the turning of larger things. You do not decide this is true. You simply allow it to be a possibility the way the Plateau allows everything, without urgency, without the need to resolve it into certainty. Your hand rests on the moss. The moss rests on the stone. The stone rests on the earth. Below the earth, somewhere in the dark, the underground water continues its unhurried route between the roots of ancient things. You can almost feel it, not hear it, not from this position, but sense the faint coolness rising through the ground beneath your feet. The particular coolness of water in motion far below a surface that appears entirely still. You stand. You do not move away from the boulder. You simply shift your position, moving slowly along its face, keeping one hand in light contact with the moss surface as you go. It is not a deliberate decision. It is the kind of movement the body makes when it has found something it is not finished with. The moss changes under your fingers as you move, drier in some sections, denser in others. One patch near what might be called the boulder's shoulder, where it is so thick your fingers sink into it up to the first knuckle before finding stone. You stop at that patch. It is extraordinary, the density of it, and warmer here than anywhere else you have touched. Not warm enough to be surprising, just warm enough to be noticed, the way you notice when the air in a room is slightly different near a south-facing wall on a winter afternoon. A stored warmth, a warmth that belongs to the long work of living things, slowly transforming stone into something else, taking decades to accomplish what would take a human hand a moment, and finding in that slowness a kind of thoroughness that speed cannot produce. You press into it gently with your whole palm. The moss receives the pressure and holds it. Above you, the boulder continues upward into the grey-white sky. From where you stand, you cannot see the top, only the curving stone face rising and rising, its moss surface darkening and then lightening again as it goes. The scale of it is, once more, briefly disorienting, not frightening, only large, only a reminder of the kind of size that exists entirely outside any human reference, that was here before reference existed, and will remain after the last person who knew this word for resting has gone. A small bird, very small, grey-brown, something that lives in open upland country and makes its living in the margins, lands on the moss surface of the boulder, perhaps 1/2 meter above your head. It lands and then is perfectly still. It looks at nothing in particular, or at everything equally. After a moment, it makes a single short sound, not a call exactly, more like the vocal equivalent of a nod, an acknowledgement of something, and then it lifts and is gone, back into the wide grey air above the plateau. You watch the space where it was. The moss holds the slight impression of where its feet rested for a fraction longer than you expect, and then that too is gone, the surface returning to itself, as though the bird had been a thought the boulder had briefly entertained and then let pass. You take your hand from the stone. The warmth of the moss stays on your palm for a moment. You hold it there, not closing your fingers, simply holding the warmth, the way you sometimes hold the last of the heat from a cup of something you have finished drinking, aware of it, not wanting to be unaware of it, letting it be present for exactly as long as it chooses to remain. Chapter 5. The Valley Between Two Sleepers. You find the passage without looking for it. One moment you are standing in the open space beside the large boulder, your palm still holding the last of its warmth, and then you are moving, slowly, without decision, along the line of stones, and the two largest boulders you have been circling resolve themselves into something you had not seen from any previous angle, a gap. A corridor of open space between them, narrow enough that you could touch both faces at once if you stretched your arms, wide enough to walk through without turning sideways. You stop at the entrance to it. The air that comes from inside is different, stiller, denser. It carries the smell of the open plateau, mineral, cold, old earth, but amplified, the way a scent is amplified in an enclosed space, concentrated by the walls that hold it. You breathe it in without moving, and it settles in your chest with a weight that is not unpleasant, the weight of a place that has been undisturbed for a long time, the weight of air that has not had to go anywhere. You step in. The ground changes immediately beneath your feet. Here, protected from the wind on all sides, the moss has grown without interruption, without the thinning and abrading that exposure causes on the open plateau. It is deep, extraordinarily deep. Your first step compresses it several centimeters before you find the firm base of earth below, and the step makes no sound at all, not a whisper, not a compression, nothing, as though the ground has decided privately to absorb everything you offer it. You take another step. The two stone faces rise on either side of you. To your left, the surface is mostly in shadow. The diffuse light of the clouded sky does not penetrate at this angle, and the moss there is very dark, almost black-green at the base, the moisture in it visible as a faint gleam where the dim light catches the surface. To your right, the second boulder's face receives slightly more light, and the moss there is lighter, more silver-green, with small irregular patches where the stone beneath shows through in the color of old rain. Above, the strip of sky between the two boulders is a soft grey-white rectangle. You look up at it. There is something quietly wonderful about sky seen from a narrow space. It becomes more itself, more sky. Contained by the edges of stone on either side, it clarifies. Not brighter, not bluer, just more present. The way anything becomes more present when you give it a frame and your full attention. You walk to the middle of the corridor and stop. Here the air is warmest. Not warm. The cold is still present, still clean, still sitting against your skin with its mineral patience. But the relative warmth of a space protected from the wind is remarkable after the hours of open exposure. You feel it first on your face, the absence of the small constant drain of warmth that moving air creates. Your skin settles. Your face, which has been holding itself slightly against the cold without your having noticed, releases. You let out a breath. It rises, just barely visible, into the still air between the stones and disperses before it reaches the strip of sky above. You look for somewhere to sit, and the corridor provides one without requiring you to search. At the base of the right-hand boulder, where the moss is deepest and the stone curves slightly outward from its base before rising vertically, there is a natural seat, a low ledge of stone just above ground level, entirely covered in moss, so thick it has lost all hardness to the eye. You move toward it. You lower yourself onto it slowly. The moss receives your weight. It is like sitting on something that was made for sitting, not shaped for it, not designed, but arrived at through the long accumulation of growth and time, and the particular way this stone curved when it settled, and the particular way the moss responded to that curve over decades of patient addition. You settle into it. Your back finds the stone face behind you, moss-covered, cool through your jacket, but not unpleasantly so. A coolness that is simply the nature of stone, the nature of things that have been here in all weathers and absorbed all of them equally. You sit. The corridor is quiet in a way the open plateau was not. On the plateau, the quiet had breadth. It was the quiet of open space, which is really a kind of low continuous sound, the sound of a landscape breathing through its grasses and its stone faces and its distant tree line. Here, the quiet is different. It has walls. It is contained, specific, the quiet of a small room in an old building where the stone is thick and the world outside has simply stopped being relevant. The wind is above you, not around you. You can hear it, just. A low movement of air across the top of the corridor, the sound it makes passing over the irregular stone faces of the two boulders above. A tone that is barely a tone, more a pressure change than a sound. It comes and goes in slow pulses. In, out. The kind of rhythm you start to notice only when you have been still long enough to stop expecting anything other than stillness. In, out. Your own breathing has slowed. You are not aware of deciding this. You become aware of it as a fact after it has already happened, the way you sometimes become aware, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, that your shoulders have dropped from where they were holding themselves near your ears, and you cannot say exactly when they descended, only that they have, and the relief of it is real. The moss beneath you holds your weight with a consistency that is almost communicative, not soft in the way that gives way and then fails to support, soft in the way that accepts completely and then remains. You are held entirely, without effort on your part. The stone and the growth of many years between you and the stone and the earth below the stone, all of it receiving you without comment, without any particular interest in the fact of you, simply receiving. A small sound to your left. You turn your head slowly. Nothing visible. The dark moss face of the left-hand boulder, its green-black surface gleaming faintly. A settling sound, perhaps. The micro-adjustments of stone and earth that happen continuously and silently in old places, that only become audible in deep quiet. Or water again, the underground water finding a new path through the dark, rearranging itself by fractions. You turn back. The strip of sky above the corridor has not changed. Grey-white even, patient. It is not the sky of a day that is building toward anything. It is the sky of a day that is content to simply be this, overcast and still and without ambition, for as long as it takes. You find that you are not thinking about anything. This is worth noting, though noting it is the kind of thing that can interrupt it, so you note it lightly, briefly. A small internal acknowledgement, no heavier than the stem of grass resting against the boulder face you watched earlier. And then you release it and return to the not thinking, which is still there, waiting, patient as moss. The cold of the stone at your back has become familiar. It is no longer something to notice. It is simply part of the temperature of where you are, along with the still air and the deep moss under your legs, and the faint smell of this sheltered place, that dense, living smell of growth in the dark, of patience made physical. Above you, the wind moves again across the top of the corridor. In. Out. Your breath follows it without asking your permission. In, slow and full, the cold air clean in your chest. Out, slow and complete, released without remainder. You are not directing this. It is simply happening. The way the underground water is simply happening. The way the moss is simply happening. Growth and breath, and the slow movement of things that have no reason to hurry and have known this for a long time. The corridor holds you. The two boulders on either side of you, whatever they are, whatever the plateau has been suggesting they are, in its patient and uncommitted way, rest in their long resting, and you rest with them, and the sky above is grey and still, and asks nothing, and the moss is warm enough, and the air is cold enough, and the silence between the wind's slow pulses is deep enough that you could lean your head back against the stone behind you, which you do lightly and simply remain. Chapter 6. The Dragon Breathes. The mist comes in without announcing itself. You do not see it arrive. You become aware of it the way you became aware of your own slowed breathing, as a fact that has already been true for some time before you noticed it. The far end of the corridor, the opening through which you entered, has softened. The edges of it have lost their definition, where before you could see the clear line of where stone ended and open plateau began. Now there is only a gradation, stone into grey, grey into white, white into the general diffuse brightness of a world that has quietly wrapped itself in something thicker than air. You watch it without moving. The mist does not behave the way moving air behaves. It does not come from one direction. It does not stream or rush or eddy. It simply accumulates, the way certain kinds of understanding accumulate, not arriving so much as becoming present, filling the space that was previously empty of it so gradually that you could not identify the moment of change even if you tried. It is at the ground first, as it always is. The moss at the base of the left-hand boulder disappears into it, not suddenly, not with any drama, just slowly submerged, the dark green of the lower surface fading into white-grey from the bottom up, the way a shoreline is covered by a tide that has no urgency and no intention other than the one that water has always had, which is simply to fill. The corridor narrows in the mist. Not actually. The stone faces are exactly where they have always been, the same distance apart, the same height, but with the far end obscured and the lower sections of both boulders softening into the white. The space you are sitting in has contracted in a way that has nothing to do with measurement. It feels smaller, more enclosed, not uncomfortably. The word that comes is held rather than contained, the difference being entirely one of feeling rather than fact. You are held. The moss beneath you, the stone at your back, the mist at both ends of the corridor, the strip of sky above, still visible, still its patient grey-white, though the edges of the boulder faces that frame it have lost their sharpness now, the stone dissolving slightly into the white air at its margins. You tilt your head back against the stone behind you. The cold of it travels through the moss and through the fabric of your jacket and reaches the back of your skull lightly, a clean and grounding cold, the kind that locates you precisely in your body without demanding anything of you. Here, this temperature, this surface, this moment. The wind moves above the corridor. It is different now than it was earlier. You notice this without being able to say exactly when the change happened. Earlier, the wind above the corridor was irregular, variable in its timing, variable in its tone, the sound of air moving across an exposed landscape and making its decisions as it went. Now it is more consistent, more rhythmic. It passes over the top of the corridor in pulses that are separated by intervals of equal length, and the sound it makes as it crosses the uneven stone faces of the two boulders has settled into something almost tonal, a low resonance, not quite a note, not a note, somewhere in the range of sound that the body receives before the ears fully process it. You feel it in your sternum, a faint vibration, not unpleasant, the opposite. It is the kind of low frequency that something in the body recognizes and responds to with a relaxation it did not know it was withholding. Your chest loosens slightly. Your jaw, which you were not aware of holding, releases by a fraction. In. The wind arrives over the stone. Out. It passes, and the interval of quiet returns. You do not decide to breathe with it. You notice, sometime after it begins, that you already are. Your inhale aligns with the arrival of the wind above you, and your exhale releases with the quiet between, and your body has made this adjustment without consulting you, following something it apparently recognized before you did, the rhythm of a very large and very patient breathing, the slow respiration of stone and air, and the wide plateau beyond the corridor where the mist is thickening now around the resting shapes of the other boulders. Your breath rises, you can see it. In this cold and this stillness, each exhale becomes briefly visible, a small pale cloud, lighter than the mist outside, rising slowly from your lips and dispersing before it reaches the strip of sky above. You watch it for a few breaths. There is something in watching your own breath made visible that is quietly clarifying. It makes the breathing more real, more present, the evidence of your own aliveness, offered up and then given away again and again, without cost. In. Out. The mist thickens at the far end of the corridor. The opening is mostly white now. The shapes of the open plateau beyond it, the other boulders, the pale grass, the long undulations of the terrain, are gone. There is only the white, close and soft, and the corridor, and the two stone faces on either side of you, and the moss, and the low tonal resonance of the wind above. Your hands rest in your lap. You become aware of their weight, not as a burden, simply as a fact. Hands in your lap, heavy in the way that relaxed things are heavy, not the heaviness of tension, but the heaviness of release. The warmth of your own palms resting against each other, small and consistent and entirely sufficient. The left-hand boulder face is almost entirely dissolved into the mist now. You can see the general mass of it, the dark, large presence of stone and moss, but the surface detail is gone. The variations in the moss color, the slight irregularities of the stone beneath, the particular deepening of the shadows in its lower sections, all of that has been gently erased, leaving only the suggestion of a large and curved mass, dark against the white. It is, you think, and the thought arrives quietly, without insistence, exactly how something very large might look if it were breathing. The mass of it seems, very slightly, to expand on the wind's arrival, to contract on the quiet that follows. You know this is the mist moving, or your eyes adjusting, or the simple consequence of sitting very still in a small space for long enough that perception becomes more sensitive and less reliable simultaneously. You know this, and the knowing does not prevent you from watching the dark mass of the boulder and feeling in the slow, reliable rhythm of the wind above and your own breath below, something that is not quite a thought, more like a recognition. Your weight has settled fully into the moss beneath you. You can no longer feel the distinction between where your body ends and the surface begins. There is simply weight and warmth, and the cold of the stone at your back that is no longer cold in any uncomfortable sense, only different, a different temperature, a different kind of presence, the temperature of something that has been here far longer than you, and will be here far longer than you, and holds that fact without pride or weight of any kind. The wind comes. Your chest opens. The wind passes. You release. Somewhere beyond the white end of the corridor, on the open plateau, where the mist is thickest now, the other boulders rest in their particular stillness. You cannot see them. You do not need to. You know they are there. The moss-covered shapes, the long curved lines of stone, the parallel ridges running beneath a surface that has had centuries to become whatever it has become. They are there, and they are doing what they have always been doing, which is nothing, which is everything, which is the long, unhurried work of remaining. The strip of sky above the corridor is still pale, still patient, still entirely uninterested in resolution. Your head is heavy against the stone behind you, a good heaviness, the heaviness of something that has stopped holding itself up and found in that stopping that the surface beneath it was always going to be sufficient. In, out. The mist holds the corridor in its soft and weightless hands. You remain. See Chapter 7. Losing the Edge of Things. At some point you stopped counting things. You do not know exactly when. It was not a decision. Nothing up here has been a decision, not really. More a series of small surrenders, each one so gradual and so comfortable that the word surrender does not quite fit. Releases, perhaps. Small releases, one after another, like knots coming undone, not because someone untied them, but because they have been wet and warm, and still for long enough that they simply let go. The first thing you stopped counting was time, then distance, then the number of boulders visible from any given position, which you had been tracking somewhere in the background of your awareness without realizing it. A quiet accounting, the mind's habit of cataloguing, of knowing where things are in relation to other things, in case that information becomes necessary. It has not become necessary. It will not. You release it without ceremony, and the space where it was fills immediately with something that is not another thought, but simply more of the existing quiet. You are still in the corridor, or you have moved. You are not entirely certain. There was a point where you shifted position, or perhaps stood, or perhaps only shifted your weight on the moss ledge, and after that the corridor felt both the same and different, the way a room feels different after you have been asleep in it. The stone faces are still on either side of you. The mist is still at both ends, thicker now, or perhaps the same, and only appearing thicker because your eyes have stopped working as hard to see through it. You look at the left-hand boulder. You look at it for some time. And then a quiet thing happens, which is that you stop looking at a boulder and simply look. The objectness of it, the category, the label, the mental filing of this is a large rock covered in moss on a Swiss plateau, softens and recedes, not because you have forgotten what it is, but because that information has become temporarily irrelevant. What remains is only the immediate sensory fact of it, dark, large, present, warm in a relative way, its surface a texture that your eyes can almost feel, its lower sections hidden in white, its upper mass rising into the grey-white air above, with a patience so total it has become a quality of the air itself. It is here. That is all it is doing, and somehow that is the most complete thing you have witnessed all day. Your eyes move to the right-hand face. The same thing happens. The category dissolves. What is left is silver-green and curved and large, and still and faintly luminous where the diffuse light catches the moss's surface moisture, and that is everything, and that is sufficient, and your eyes rest on it the way eyes rest on the middle distance when the mind behind them has stopped requiring anything of the view. The mist at the far end of the corridor has erased the plateau entirely. There is no outside anymore. There is no beyond. There is the corridor and the two stone presences on either side, and the strip of sky above, and the moss beneath, and the still, dense air that carries its ancient smell of damp and growth and patient stone. That is the complete world. It is not a small world. It has everything a world requires: warmth and cold and texture and breath and the low tonal pulse of the wind above, arriving and retreating in its slow and reliable rhythm. In, out. Your body is heavy. Not the heaviness of exhaustion. You have not been tired in the way that requires recovery. This is a different heaviness, the heaviness of a body that has stopped bracing, that has stopped anticipating the next thing, the next movement, the next requirement. It is the heaviness of something that has remembered, at a level below language, that the ground is there, has always been there, will continue to be there, and that there is therefore no need to hold yourself away from it. You let the weight of your shoulders go. You were not aware of holding them, and then you let them go, and the release travels down through your back and your arms, and settles somewhere at the base of your spine, a long, slow unlocking, vertebra by vertebra. Nothing dramatic, only true. The moss holds all of it. Your hands are in your lap, or one hand is resting on the moss beside you, palm down, feeling the surface that is by now entirely familiar, the specific temperature of it, the slight yield, the smell that rises from it when pressure is applied, green and damp and old. You have touched this surface so many times today that the distinction between your hand and the moss has become less certain. Not literally, you can still feel the boundary, but the information your hand sends back no longer says foreign, it says known. You realize you have not thought about anything for a while. The realization arrives gently, without fanfare. It simply surfaces, the way something surfaces in still water when you stop disturbing it, rising from the bottom, not because anything propelled it upward, but because that is what things do when the surface is no longer agitated. You notice it. You hold it very lightly, the way you held the warmth of the moss in your palm earlier, without closing your fingers around it. You have not thought about anything for a while. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, a very specific kind of something. The kind that is difficult to arrive at and easy to lose and impossible to force and happens, when it happens, only because everything else has been allowed to settle. The mind, given sufficient stillness and sufficient time, and a world that asks nothing of it, will eventually stop offering its constant commentary, will put down its inventory of concerns and its running calculations and its rehearsals of past and future, and simply be here, in this corridor, in this grey-white air, with these stones. You let the realization go. It sinks back down, and the surface closes over it, and the quiet returns, uninterrupted. The wind above the corridor comes. Your breath opens with it, effortless, automatic, no longer something you are doing, but something that is simply happening, the way the underground water is happening, the way the moss is happening, slow and patient, and without the need for direction. The wind passes. Your breath releases. The mist at the near end of the corridor, the end behind you, the direction you came from, has thickened enough now that you can see it from where you sit. The world behind you is white. The world ahead of you is white. You are between them, in this narrow-held space, and neither the behind nor the ahead requires anything of you. Only here, only this. The moss beneath your hand, the stone at your back. The dark and silver masses of the two boulders, holding their position, holding the air between them, holding you, not deliberately, not with any awareness of you, simply by being what they are in the places they have always been. Their size has stopped being a fact you are measuring yourself against. It is simply part of the quality of the space, part of what makes the air here feel different, part of what makes the quiet here deeper than the quiet of smaller places. You breathe. The wind breathes. Somewhere below you, in the dark between the roots of old things, water moves along its unhurried route and does not know you are here, and does not need to. A single drop of moisture falls from the moss face of the right-hand boulder. You hear it, faint, precise, a small percussion in the deep quiet, as it meets the moss at the boulder's base. It is the clearest sound you have heard in some time. Not loud, extraordinarily clear. The kind of clarity that only exists when everything surrounding a sound has been reduced to stillness. It settles. The quiet returns, deeper for having been briefly broken, the way the surface of water is more still in the moments after a small disturbance than it was before. You close your eyes. Or perhaps your eyes were already closed. You are not entirely certain, and the uncertainty does not trouble you, and that absence of trouble is itself a kind of information. The information that the distinction between eyes open and eyes closed has become for now a small and manageable thing, a difference of degree rather than kind, both states offering the same grey-white world, the same warmth, the same stone, the same breath moving in and out without requiring your supervision. You are here. Fully, completely, without remainder. Chapter 8. Almost Stone. Your body has become very heavy, not all at once. It happened the way the mist happened, gradually, without a specific moment of beginning, accumulating by degrees until the fact of it was simply present and complete. Your legs are heavy. Your arms are heavy. Your hands, resting where they rest, have taken on a weight that belongs to objects rather than to things that move. You are aware of this without concern. The heaviness is not a problem to solve. It is a condition to inhabit, and inhabiting it requires nothing except the willingness to stop resisting it, which you have already done some time ago without ceremony. The moss beneath you continues its patient work of receiving. You have been sitting long enough now that the surface has conformed slightly to your weight, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough that the contact between your body and the ground feels complete in a way it did not when you first sat down. Then, you were a visitor. Now, you are simply here. And the difference between those two states is the difference between a surface that is being sat upon and a surface that is simply where you are. The mist is very thick. Both ends of the corridor have been white for some time. You know this without looking. You can feel it in the quality of the air, denser, more enclosed, the smell of it deeper now, as though the moisture has amplified every organic note the corridor carries. The moss, the earth beneath the moss, the stone beneath the earth, the particular cold of a high place that has been breathing the same breath since long before there were words for breathing. You breathe it in, slowly. Hold it for just a moment, not effortfully, only naturally, the way a breath pauses at its highest point before returning, and then release it completely without keeping any part of it back. The stone at your back. You are aware of it the way you are aware, in deep rest, of the surface beneath you, not as a sensation requiring attention, but as a ground note, a constant, something so reliably present that the awareness of it has merged with the general condition of existing in this place. The cold of it has long since become simply temperature. Your temperature, the temperature of here. A thought surfaces. It is a small thought, incomplete, more impression than language. Something about the shepherds from earlier, about the word they had, the untranslatable one. Resting before the next flight. The thought turns over once, slowly, and then sinks back down without requiring a response, and the quiet that closes over it is deeper than the quiet that preceded it. The way water is more settled after something has passed through it, and the surface has smoothed again. You let your weight go a little further. Your spine releases another fraction against the stone behind you. Your shoulders, which had perhaps been holding a small residual tension you were unaware of, they let it go now. The release travels downward, unhurried, through your back, through the points of contact between your body and the moss, and out into the ground beneath you, where it disperses into the earth the way warmth disperses, gradually and completely, leaving nothing behind that needs to be accounted for. The wind above the corridor, in, out. The interval between them has lengthened, or your sense of time has lengthened, which amounts to the same thing from where you are sitting. The pulse of it is very slow now, very wide. Each arrival of the wind feels like something that has traveled a great distance to reach you, and each departure feels like something returning to a place it was always going back to. You do not follow it with your attention. You simply receive it and release it, the way the corridor receives the wind and releases it, the way the boulder faces receive the pressure of the air and release it, the way the moss receives the moisture and holds it until it is time to release that too. Everything here is in the business of receiving and releasing, and you have become, without deciding to, one more element in that long patient exchange. Your breath is very slow. You are aware of it only at intervals now, the way you are aware of your heartbeat sometimes, in deep stillness, as a thing that is happening reliably without your supervision. A background constancy so fundamental that the noticing of it is almost surprising, like becoming aware of a sound that has always been there. In, out. The chest rises and falls. The cold air enters and warms inside you and leaves again, slightly warmer, carrying a small amount of you back into the corridor's air, which is fine, which is how it has always worked. The left-hand boulder is a dark mass in the white. You are looking at it with your eyes not quite focused, or focused on a distance that does not correspond to the actual distance of the stone, the focus of eyes that are resting rather than seeing. The mass of it is soft at its edges. The mist has done that, has taken the hard boundary of stone and moss and air, and turned it into a gradation, a slow transition from dark to grey to white, so that the boulder does not end so much as it continues, differently, into the surrounding air. Everything has edges like this now. Your own edges feel less certain than they did this morning. Not alarmingly, only softly. The boundary of your skin, the line between where you end and where the air begins, has become less a wall and more a place where exchange happens. The cold comes in, the warmth goes out, information moves in both directions, quietly, continuously. You are less a separate thing than a particular local concentration of warmth and weight and slow breath, embedded in a corridor between two very old stones on a high plateau where the mist has made the world both smaller and somehow larger. A sound, very small, from the right-hand boulder, something settling, the near inaudible sound of a surface adjusting by fractions to its own weight, or ice somewhere in a deep crack, melting and shifting, or simply the sound of stone being stone, which is a sound too slow for human hearing to follow, but occasionally, in moments of great stillness, offers a single note, a small report, evidence of a process so gradual it operates almost entirely below the threshold of human time. It comes, it goes. The silence after it is profound. You sit in it and you feel, without quite thinking, that you have been given something, not a message, not information, only the small gift of evidence that the stones around you are not static, not frozen, not finished. They are in process, moving at a speed you cannot observe, but can in moments like this briefly hear. Everything is moving. Everything has always been moving. It is only the tempo that differs. And tempo is a human preference, not a law of the world. Your hands. You look at them without lifting your head, just a slow drop of the eyes, the head remaining against the stone, the gaze traveling down to where your hands rest. They are still, warm against each other where they touch, the backs of them pale in the diffuse light of the corridor, the skin carrying the slight roughness of a day in cold air. They look, in this light, in this stillness, like something that belongs here, not out of place, not foreign, simply hands resting in a corridor of old stone, on a high plateau where the mist has turned the world soft. You close your eyes. The darkness behind them is warm, warmer than the air. It has the particular quality of inner darkness, not empty but full, a fullness that is not visual, that asks nothing of vision. You rest in it. The stone is still at your back. The moss is still beneath you. The wind still comes and goes above, slower now, or you are slower, and the difference has ceased to matter. The weight of your body is enormous and entirely comfortable. You are as heavy as the stone behind you. You are as patient as the moss beneath you. You are as unhurried as the mist that has turned both ends of the corridor into the same soft white. Somewhere below, the water moves in the dark. It has been moving since before this stone was on the surface. It will be moving long after the stone has become something else. It moves now, in this moment, through the cold and the dark and the ancient channels of the earth, and you are above it, resting. And it does not know this, and that is fine, that is more than fine. That is the precise and simple arrangement of everything. Your breath, in, out. The corridor holds you. The stones hold the corridor. The plateau holds the stones. And all of it, the moss and the cold air, and the slow pulse of the wind, and the underground water, and the long curved shapes resting in the white, all of it holds its position in the patient and total dark of a world that has been doing this for longer than memory reaches, and will continue doing it long after this particular warmth, this particular breath, this particular moment of rest has been released back into the air from which it came. You remain heavy, still, almost stone. Chapter 9. The Last Thing You Hear. There is a moment in very deep rest when the world stops requiring translation. You stop converting what you hear into meaning. You stop converting what you feel into information. Things arrive, the cold, the wind, the low tonal pulse of the corridor, and they arrive completely, without the small delay of interpretation, without the mind stepping in to name them and file them and decide what they signify. They are simply present. You are simply present. And between those two facts, there is no longer any distance worth measuring. This is that moment. The mist outside the corridor is complete now. You know this, not because you can see it. Your eyes have been closed, or nearly closed, the distinction no longer meaningful, but because the quality of the light that reaches you through your eyelids has changed. Earlier, it was the diffuse grey-white of an overcast sky. Now it is softer still, more even. The mist has taken the sky's light and distributed it so thoroughly that it comes from everywhere at once, from no direction, a luminescence without source, filling the air the way water fills a vessel, completely, without preference, occupying every space equally. Everything is equally lit. Everything is equally still. The wind comes. You feel it before you hear it. A faint change in the pressure of the air inside the corridor, a slight increase in density, as though the atmosphere outside has taken a breath and the corridor is feeling the first movement of it. Then the sound, that low, unhurried tone crossing the boulder, faces above you, the almost note, the resonance that lives just below the frequency of music and just above the frequency of silence. Your chest opens, holds, releases. The wind passes. You have lost the thread of any thought you may have begun. This is not a loss. The thread was thin, and the place it led was nowhere you needed to go tonight, and it has dissolved back into the general warmth of whatever is happening behind your closed eyes, which is not darkness exactly, more a deep and living amber, the color of the inside of something warm, something that has been warm for a very long time. You feel the moss beneath your hands. One palm is still resting on the surface beside you. You did not move it. The moss is exactly as it was. That specific temperature, that specific yield, that specific smell of green things growing with great patience in cold conditions. But the hand that rests on it has stopped noting these qualities as separate facts. They have merged into a single sensation that is simply here and good and enough. The stone at your back, still there. Still maintaining, without effort or intention, the particular cold of ancient rock in high-altitude air, a cold that has been the background condition of this place through winters you cannot count, and will continue to be the background condition through winters you will not see. It holds this without pride, without any quality of holding at all, really. It simply is what it is, and what it is has not changed since before your warmest ancestor first noticed cold, and will not change after the last person who knows this particular shade of grey-green moss, is gone. You breathe. The breath is very slow, slower than you would consciously choose if you were choosing. It is the breath of a body that has been given permission to find its own pace and has found it, and the pace is this: unhurried, deep and sufficient. Not the breath of sleep, not yet, or perhaps already, the boundary having softened to the point where the question no longer has a clear answer. The breath of somewhere between. The breath of a body that is almost stone. Outside the corridor, the plateau continues. The other boulders rest in the white. The grass between them, pale and stiff, bends in the long, slow arcs it has always bent in, following the wind that has always moved through it, indifferent to seasons, in the way that very simple things are indifferent, not because they do not experience them, but because they have experienced so many that any single one has become simply part of the continuity, part of the long unbroken sentence of being here. The moss on those boulders holds its moisture. The underground water follows its route. The mist continues its patient accumulation. All of this is happening now, at this moment, on this plateau, whether or not there is anyone here to register it. That is not a cold thought. It is, in fact, a deeply comfortable one. The realization that the world does not require your attention in order to continue being what it is, that it has been doing this, quietly and completely, for an enormous span of time, that it will go on doing it, that your presence here is a small and temporary thing, welcome in the way all small and temporary things are welcome in large and patient spaces, without ceremony, without condition, simply received. You are received. The wind comes once more, very low, almost below hearing. You feel it more than hear it, that faint pressuring of the air, that shift in the quality of the silence that tells you the silence is not empty, but full, full of the slow respiration of stone and plateau and open sky. Your breath follows it. The last of the day's tension, whatever remained, whatever had persisted through the walk up the trail and the first cold hours on the plateau and the long gradual settling of the afternoon, releases now. You feel it go the way you feel, warmth leave a room when a window is opened. Not suddenly, not dramatically, only completely, and then it is gone, and what replaces it is not absence, but something cleaner, cooler, the temperature of a space that has been cleared. Your body is where it is, heavy and still, and warm at its center, and cool at its edges, and breathing very slowly in the dark behind your eyes. The moss is where it is. The stone is where it is. The mist is where it is. Everywhere now, filling the world outside this corridor with its patient white, turning the boulder shapes into suggestions, turning the plateau into a landscape of impression rather than fact. Everything softened to its essential quality, stripped of detail, left only with presence. You do not need to hold anything. You have not needed to hold anything for some time. The corridor holds you, the moss holds you, the cold and the stillness and the slow breathing of the wind above hold you without effort, without awareness of doing so, the way the earth holds everything that rests upon it, simply by being what it is, simply by continuing to be here. The large stones rest in the white. They have always been resting. That is what they do. It is not inaction. It is the most complete kind of action, the kind that requires nothing, that costs nothing, that persists without maintenance or intention through the long turning of seasons and the slow accumulation of moss and the gradual deepening of the channels through which the underground water finds its way. They rest, and they rest, and they rest, and the moss covers them more each century, and the earth rises slowly to meet their bases, and the mist finds them again each time the air grows cold and damp and has no particular place to be. They are not waiting for anything. They are not moving toward anything. They are simply here, in the way that very old and very large things are here, completely, without qualification, without the need for the moment to be anything other than what it is. You are, for now, the same, here. Without qualification, your breath moves in and out, and the wind moves above, and the water moves below, and the mist moves through the open plateau in its slow and weightless way, and none of these movements conflicts with any other, and none of them requires your direction, and all of them continue. The last thing you hear is not a sound. It is the absence of the need for one, the corridor, the stone, the moss, warm under your palm, your breath finding its own slow time. The world, outside and everywhere, continuing its long and patient work in the white. You are here. You are.